Hello and welcome to the Galactic Collaboration Summit. My name is Ed Senez and I'm the president and co-founder of a company called Unlimited Viz. We are the makers of a product called tyGraph. Today, I'm going to speak to you about the top 10 ways to measure Teams adoption. Before we get into that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I come from across the pond, so that's why I have the funny accent. I live in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, and beyond all of this technology stuff, I really enjoy scuba diving as a pastime. From an agenda perspective, we're going to cover off three major topics. First, three methods to access the data. Secondly, reasons to measure Teams adoption. And then finally, the top 10 ways to measure Teams adoption. In terms of accessing the data, I'm going to give you a very high-level view of this information. However, John White is giving a session, 6 ways to gain insights into your Microsoft 365 data, and he's going to be drilling very deep on how to get access to the data. Now, I will tell you, if you're using tyGraph, this won't be necessary because we do that job for you. So let's first of all talk about the Microsoft Admin Console. When you are an administrator and you log into your Office 365 tenant, go to the reporting area. What you will notice is that you have some very good telemetry data on what's going on with your environment. So for example, we have Microsoft 365 Teams data, number of activations, Yammer usage, and so on and so forth. From an access perspective, you either have to be an administrator or you have to have the reader role assigned to you. If I were to drill down specifically on Teams, I would be able to look at my data by 7, 30-day, 90-day slices, or of course 180 days. And then I would also have this grid view with regard to the number of channel messages, number of calls, meetings, etc. So giving me some very good telemetry data on what's going on specifically around Teams, and I can look at other workloads as well. Now, from that screen, you can also export the data. And what you'll get is a CSV file, and this is an example of it. But literally what you see is what you get. The data is very summary level, and it allows you to take it from here and potentially work with it as pivot tables within Excel, or use another tool like Power BI to be able to investigate it further. So very high level data, telemetry data, good for certain purposes. The next set of information comes from the Compliance Center, which is your audit logs. Now, this is the polar opposite, if you will, to the Administration Center because this gives you very, very, very deep level audit data. I'd like to also point out that this URL, if you're watching this talk, it is probably worth the price of at least watching the talk to find this URL because it's not easy to find. If you go to protection.office.com/unified auditing, you will land on this audit log search page. Once you are in here, what you want to do is go in and in this case, filter down to Teams. Now within Teams, I can go and select by clicking each one of these various items. So I can collect one or many of them. And then I pick my time period. Now, for Teams, the maximum time period you can have is 90 days. So you can go back, in this case, back to kind of mid-February timeframe. And that will allow me to go and run a query and select some data. From here, you will get an output report. So as you can see, in this case, I've selected 3 different metadata types from the audit search, and I have all of the audit information displayed for me. If I were to drill down on any one of those nodes, I get the metadata and then a JSON document, which allows me to get all of the deep and rich information about everything to do with this particular transaction. And this is what it looks like to export. So as you can appreciate, much, much deeper insights than what you were getting from the compliance or from the audit center. You get all of your metadata, and then you get your JSON document in a linear format. And then, of course, you can pull these into other tools like Power BI to be able to run more analysis on it. In terms of granularity, first of all, this must be enabled for the tenant spaces. A lot of times it is, and that's what allows you to get that audit level data. It's transactional level, so as opposed to the admin center, this information is very, very detailed, held by for 90 days. And now I'm speaking specifically around Teams. You can change your policy as of earlier this spring for SharePoint Exchange and Azure Active Directory or AAD. You can extend that out to 1 year. You should also note that if you're going to try and collect this data via the API, it's only available to you for about 7 days. And I'm going to change that on the next slide to 6 days because there is some cutoff in order to get those API audit buckets, as we like to call them. So from a compliance center perspective, we have the methodologies of using that search, which is what I showed you. We can also create PowerShell script to go and collect that data. And this will allow you to go back not just the 6 days, but back a full 90 days and pull that data out and be able to dump it into some sort of format that you can work with. And of course, the management APIs. And incidentally, that's what we use from a product perspective. tyGraph uses those management APIs to collect that audit level data. And then the next thing that I want to talk to you about is what's known as usage analytics. It used to be known as the content pack from Microsoft, but now has been rebranded to usage analytics, and it's actually gone through another generation of visualizations to, if you will, clean them up a little bit, and I'll show you the difference, and you'll see what I mean. It does require a Power BI Pro license because it is an app. And the data owner, now this is the original data that's going to be pulling the information down from the tenant space, has to at least have that reporting role to them. Once they have the data, they can then disseminate this information to other Power BI Pro users vis-a-vis the share function in Power BI. The source data, we'll talk a little bit more about how the updates work for that and some of the limitations that you may run into if you're using that endpoint, or sorry, that methodology. And then you can't download this specific PBIX file to do deep customizations. The other thing that you'll notice in usage analytics is this idea of cards, where we're looking at monthly active usage. So the primary driving point for your analytics is really looking at that MAU score, the monthly average usage score, and we'll be able to show you what that looks like. So now, without further ado, I'm just going to jump over to a demonstration. So as I mentioned, usage analytics has gone through both naming and branding changes. So if you're looking at this, you are in the wrong spot. This is the older version of Microsoft Usage Analytics. So I'm going to jump over into what is known, or what is now the new Usage Analytics reporting. And as you can tell, cosmetically, a lot nicer to look through. You have some really good executive summary dashboards and some proper methodologies for looking at this information. So we can look at the executive summary. We can go into an overview mode, looking at the various workloads, Teams as an example in this particular case. We can look at licensing, product usage, and then we get down into the user activity. And this is where a lot of information can be found. We can do things like separate by department, assuming your Azure Active Directory information is properly formed. By country, state, city, etc. So these are the types of filters, and I was just looking at Exchange data. I can now click over to Teams data and see all the different types of activities that are associated with Teams. So some really good information here, and I encourage you to check it out. Now we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that you may run into as you're looking at this data. So again, we're scoped to Teams, and I'm in edit mode at this point, and I've applied a filter. So I'm going to show you all the data that say on or after May 1st, and I'm going to apply that filter. And you'll see we have no data here. So even though we're into June, it takes a little bit of time for that data to shown into the reporting cycle. So here's the challenge, right? The data is reporting from a user perspective at the end of every month. So if I'm, now at the beginning of June, I will be able to get some of my May data, but it may or may not be reflected depending on the workload, right when perhaps when I want it. So from a granularity perspective, this is one of the things that you do need to be aware of when you're working with the usage analytics solution. So again, very good, has a lot of really good information in it, but just know that there are some cases where you may not be able to easily get at the information that you're looking for. So my next topic is to talk about the reasons why organizations like to measure measure analytics. And the first thing I'm going to do is a bit of a level set. The level set is this. We need to delineate between reporting and analytics. Reporting, think about it from a financials perspective, because people can really relate to that as your accounting reports, your balance sheet, your income statements, all of the things that you would typically use to analyze the health of your organization. Now, the flip side of that is analytics. So think about scenarios where, something might be a little bit off. You might be in a situation where, hey, expenses seem a little bit high. So what is your first reaction to that? You're going to go in, you're going to try and get that deep level data. Oftentimes, you might go into your accounting system and rip out some data, put it into an Excel worksheet, and start manipulating it from there. That's often the type of thing that we see. And so when you're thinking the difference between reporting and analytics, it's a very important distinction. And as we get into why or how you want to use these analytics, make sure you pay attention to that concept. First thing I'd like to say is your data needs to tell a story, and the reason for that is without data, you're just another person with an opinion, and the concept then becomes, well, okay, so what stories are we looking to tell? So these are, a good classification of things from a leadership perspective that our customers get challenged with. So, how digitally transform is your company? We talk about digital transformation, but really, what does that mean in an empirical sense? Are we 50% of the way there? Are we 75% of the way there? And if we want to throw up those types of KPIs, how would you measure that? How would you determine that we have transformed from kind of 50% to 75%? So, that's what does success look like? And that's a relative target relative to where you are on your adoption cycle. If you're brand new, you would expect a different level of success criteria than you would if you were farther down the road. And then all of this kind of leads down to why should we continue to fund these projects? And if you're able to show empirical evidence to leadership, boy, those conversations become a lot easier. Here is an example. It's a kind of an older example used by Simon Denton from MottMac in an Ignite talk about 3 or 4 years ago. But it really articulates kind of this concept of telling a story with your data. So he was walking through 3 scenarios. One, they ran a 30-day campaign. The second one was they introduced a new brand into the organization, and the third was that they conducted a number of different forums. And though we can see the nice general uptick of the curves, there were some interesting things that we could look at. Number one, we could see that even though we ran these campaigns, we were able to retain people for a period of time. And so every time we ran one, though there was that spike and valley within the data set, we also were able to keep people going. Secondly, kind of that length at which we are able to keep people on the new system also was sustained. So again, when you're having those conversations with leadership, it makes it really a lot easier to be able to tell it and back it up with data. And then finally, the other thing that's really, really critical is, I love this quote from Tom Peters, what gets measured gets done. Just the fact that you're introducing an analytic solution, and especially if you can create leadership boards and things of that nature with with leaders, there are things that will drive some, kind of that innate ability to motivate people to continue to drive success forward. So nothing like putting the goalposts up on a field to cause your game to move forward. So with that, we're going to talk about our top 10 list. And I'm going to provide some demonstrations of this in addition to a little bit of PowerPoint. So one of the things that I just commented on was this concept of a digital transformation scorecard. So we've created this one, and it's been adopted as a good way or good benchmark for organizations to understand not only how are they adopting, but with regard to Teams specifically. Teams is such a dynamic product, and what does it mean with other workloads? So, for example, are we seeing a drop in Skype traffic? Well, one would assume that, hey, that drop off in Skype is a bad thing. Well, no, because Skype is being sunsetted, and it could be that we're transitioning people over to Teams. So we're seeing people move from one workload to another. What's happening to email? Is email starting to drop off as a result of us engaging with Teams as a principal product? What's happening with SharePoint and OneDrive? Those are sundry products to the Teams environment, and we want to pay attention to those as well. The other thing that you want to be able to do is integrate your HR data. So as an example, I had shown you with usage analytics that there were some Azure Active Directory integration points, but with tyGraph, we're actually able to pull in almost 30 HR fields and another 20 kind of flex fields, allowing you to get that deep and rich analytics. And whether it comes to you vis-a-vis Azure Active Directory or another source of record like your HR information system, we can pull that data in. So let me just give you a quick example of what that looks like. So here's our digital transformation scorecard. Again, from a telemetry perspective, we can get down to the various, or sorry, from a date dimension perspective, we can get down to the various items, or we can get very prescriptive about our date formats. And over here, I'll just pull this up. We can look at either from an advanced filtering or basic filtering. If I'm looking for accounting, I can do that by department, or I can pull up information on some of the other various aspects of the HR data. So really important to be able to pivot your data by the types of things that aren't just necessarily Microsoft workloads, but other things, organizational constructs that you may be interested in. The third item is identifying those high potential users. So the idea here is that you want to be able to take a look at your data in the context of the various other workloads. So here are all of my users of Teams, but concurrent and in the same row, I'm able to see SharePoint and OneDrive and Yammer. And the idea is this: if I'm looking for a cohort of users that I want to drive Teams adoption to, am I going to just pick somebody who's only ever used email, or am I going to look at somebody who may have been using other workloads? So, for example, they may be using SharePoint and Yammer and Skype. Well, those users are obviously going to be a little bit easier to transform over into a new product like Teams. So I will flip this on its head. And as you can see, we've now shown you, did that one too many times. We're now showing you all the white space. So here are all the people using Teams, but again, in parallel to that, I can see the users that are using these other workloads. And that's the type of thing that you want to do. You want to be able to identify those high potential users, not just by, hey, what do you think Bob is, you think Bob is going to be able to learn Teams? No, you want to do that with data and empirical data. And past practices often will dictate for you the future success. The next thing you're going to want to be able to do is monitor churn. And so the idea here is to look at, not only who's coming on the system, but have we lost anybody? So this was actually a report that we created specifically for the work from home exodus, if you want to call it that, for organizations where they really wanted to understand, look, how many people are were previously using Teams and now have potentially fallen off the wagon. So we have done this by creating a users gained. So in this particular time period, again, everything is time bound. Last 30 days, we've gained 112 users, but there's 157 users that had an activity in the previous 30 days. But don't currently. And again, we can quickly pivot this to say, look in the last 90 days, and you'll see those numbers get updated. So we gained 308 users in the last 90 days, and 154 were kind of abandoned, if you will, along the way. So monitoring that user churn is super important because you work really hard to get users onboarded to the new Teams collaboration platform, but you want to make sure that you retain them over time. This next one, collaboration patterns, is really, really interesting. We introduced this into our December release, and it's really gained a lot of traction with our customers. So the idea here is understanding how people are working together dynamically. We understand volume of work, so those people that are contributing a lot to my team's environment, but who's kind of working together. And we've classified this as the hidden network. And the reason is you have your org structure, which is how you think people will be working together, but the reality is this is how they do work together. So we're seeing different nodes of individuals. You may want to pay attention to some of these islands. Are there people that are just kind of collaborating among themselves, which may be fine. We can slice this, of course, not only by a particular, by the whole network, but also a particular team or channel. Number 6 is identifying your influencers or champions. If you're really trying to drive Teams adoption, one of the things that is so important for you is to be able to quickly zero in on those people who are the top influencers. And what we mean by top influencers, the thing that we're breaking out here is not just the people that are providing high volumes of content, but these are people that are contributing in a way that causes impact. So they'll post a message and that message turns into a thread within teams and channels. They're collaborating with not just one or two individuals, but multiple individuals. And then what's their breadth? Are they collaborating in one team or channel or multiple? And then of course their reach with the number of people they're engaging with. So a very dynamic social analysis of how people are collaborating. And then we can take a look within a particular team and channel and slice that down to see, within this channel, who are my top influencers. Again, from an adoption and change management perspective, these are your champions. These are the people that we can quickly and empirically pull out of the network so that you can approach them and help you in your effort to drive Teams adoption. The next one is device usage patterns. So understanding how people are consuming Teams. Are they using the client? Are they using the web browser? Are they using mobile? If they're using mobile, what type of mobile are they using? Are they, on the road on the phone, or are they using an iPad? And of course, I know not very many people are on the road these days, but in the future, we'll want to be able to break that out. The next one is targeted, target unused teams for deletion. So the one thing that's super important for you is to be able to go in and understand which teams have zero activity. So we'll go and take a look at what kind of tabs and channels have been set up, but these are teams that have zero activity. We have the owners identified with an email icon to be able to click right into email and reach out to those individuals. But at the end of the day, getting rid of that clutter, people like to create teams and get all excited about it, but the corporate hygiene needs to be in place whereby we're going to go and get rid of the stuff that you do not want people focusing on. And those teams and channels with very little focus are a really good one to look at. The next one is sentiment and keyword tracking. This is also new to our product, and again, a response to what was going on with the COVID crisis. So now, I didn't have COVID as part of my lexicon, which shows you just how new this is. So I'm using the word services. So the one thing I'm going to want to do is understand from a word cloud perspective, what are the things that are surround from a word analytics perspective. When I'm looking at that word, what things are surrounding it. Show me when this word entered the lexicon of the organization. And it was interesting working with customers globally, and some that were more advanced, Asia and so forth, that were more advanced in starting to use this terminology in their organization. And then finally, the sentiment score around what's going on. So think about this. You don't have access to see the physical human beings in the office, but from data we can go and infer kind of how are people feeling, what's the sentiment around things like work from home and quarantine and COVID, et cetera, and really getting some good insights into what's going on in my organization without actually being able to have access to all those users on a day-to-day basis. And then finally, activity patterns by day, month, time of day. That is something that we do have in most of our visualizations kind of right out of the box. And the idea here is that we can go from summary level data, which is understanding, on a day-to-day pattern. But some of the things you may want to do is be able to reach out to teams when they're active, when we have eyes on the canvas, or eyes on the screen, if you will. This is, of course, in UTC, so for most of you in Europe, the math is fairly easy. Because we deal with global organizations, we've standardized on a UTC time frame. But we're looking here at time of day, and I can see that in this across this network, between 4 and 5 p.m. is when I have most eyeballs on the screen. But I can go take a look at a particular team. And drill into that team and see it may be a little bit different. Oh, well, this team is between 6 and 7 p.m. seems to be from the best time of day to be posting into this teamer channel to gain the best visibility. So I know that was a very quick summary of the top 10 ways to measure teams and teams adoption, and I will stop here for questions. Thank you.
Thank you for being a part of the Galactic Collaboration Summit. Join the community and meet in-person world-class Microsoft and MVP speakers this autumn in Wiesbaden, Frankfurt, Germany, with 15 full-day tutorials and over 150 Microsoft 365 and Azure sessions at the combined European Collaboration Summit and European Cloud Summit from 26 to 28 October 2020. Community rocks.